The moderator of today's executive session is Tommy Shee, who's the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Day Pitney, who's one of the sponsors of this morning's program. As a member of the Day Pitney senior management team, Tommy leads the development and implementation of the firm's strategic diversity and inclusion plan. He's active in diversity activities and organizations and is a frequent speaker and panelist on diversity issues. He most recently was the head of procurement of Mercedes-Benz Manhattan and served for over 10 years as the diversity and inclusion officer for Mercedes-Benz USA. He also served for over 10 years as counsel in MBUSA's legal department, managing litigation, marketing, intellectual property, and real estate matters. Tommy?
Thank you very much, and good morning, and good to see that the Boston weather is still as it was when I was here in law school many years ago, so thank you for being here this morning. And thanks for that great lead-in for the keynote, Montserrat. I think you touched upon a lot of good points, and I think what really struck me was your comment that there is no silver bullet, and that's absolutely right. But I think that together, with all our efforts, we can come up with effective best practices to drive diversity and inclusion forward. So one bit of a administrative note today. Unfortunately, Ron Allen could not join us today, so we will keep him apprised of the discussion, and we have other fantastic panelists here as well. So just before we start, I just wanted to sort of throw out what we hope to accomplish this morning, which is, to provide a wide-ranging perspective on the various aspects of leveraging diversity and inclusion in the legal and business environment. That's a dominant topic today. You can see it in all the various publications and in the media. And D&I is very much in the forefront, but I think, as also discussed, there are also accompanying challenges as well. And I think these challenges have persisted for the past 10, 15, 20 years. It's almost like sometimes it feels like Groundhog Day in that we have the umpteenth letters that the GCs write about the lack of diversity, and that spurs a lot of movement and then kind of quiets down. So I think that hopefully we can pierce through this cycle one of these days and really make some meaningful change. Thanks again for this opportunity. Just to quickly add, proud to be here from Day Pitney. We're an East Coast law firm. I'm based in our Parsippany, New Jersey office. And for our firm, diversity and inclusion are core values. And we view diversity and inclusion as a business imperative. We strive to adopt the best practices, such as the Mansfield Rule, to ensure that a firm consistently and consciously considers diversity in hiring and leadership decisions. So today's panelists we have Marianne Monti, Chief People Officer at Shawmut Design and Construction. We had Ingrid Schaffner, Associate GC at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Health and Human Services. And then we have Raquel Webster, Senior Counsel at National Grid. Everyone's bio is in the program, but what I'd like to do is to ask each of our panelists to offer one fact, hopefully a surprising fact that's not in their bio. So, Marianne, would you start with one, please?
Sure. Good morning. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Marianne Monti. I do want to point out the irony of a construction firm being here. I'm sure many of you in the past have thought, in fact, when I was recruited to Shawmut, my wife said to me, isn't construction where sexual harassment and bad behavior started? Wasn't it created there? And I said, I'm up for the challenge if that's true. I've not found that to be true, but I do want you to know I'm the Chief People Officer at Shawmut Design and Construction here in the South End. We have offices in Boston, Providence, Western Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, Los Angeles now, Las Vegas, and Chicago, and Miami. And I couldn't be more proud to represent Shawmut Design and Construction today. Just two small little known facts that are not in my bio. I joked right after college I really wanted to go to law school, but my parents told me, make some money, get real world experience, and I was recruited to be the cheddar sour cream manager at Frito-Lay in upstate New York. After a year of chasing cheddar sour cream clumps, I decided to go to law school. And it is 20 years ago this spring that I took my last exam in this very building, and it just opened up. So I'm so thrilled to be back 20 years later.
Thanks. Ingrid?
Hi, I'm Ingrid Schroffner, Ingrid Chiemi Schroffner. I am also thrilled to be here. A fact you might not know about me is that I am also a singer-songwriter. I have released original music on a CD. I used to play out. I still write songs, but I don't play out anymore because I have 3 kids, one of whom had a bar mitzvah this past weekend. I own 4 guitars, 2 acoustics, 2 hollow body electrics, one of which is a 1966 anniversary edition Gretsch.
And Raquel?
Why do I have to go after Ingrid? My name is Raquel Webster. I'm senior counsel at National Grid. Before that, I was working at the City of Boston Law Department as a litigator. And before that, I was working at a large firm for about 7 years as a litigator. Interesting fact about me, I may get a little hoarse today because I sing gospel with my church, and I'm a part of this group, and the director of the group always tells us at the last minute that we're performing in a concert. And he always says, oh, well, it's the same songs, that, we used last year, so you're good. So I sang a concert on Saturday. I was completely hoarse at my hearings yesterday and Monday, and my voice is finally coming back. So I will not sing today, but I do love singing.
Great, thanks. And I think for mine, it's I'm a real closet barbecue aficionado, and I'm trying to find that great technique for making the perfect brisket. So thanks, everyone. But seriously, I think these aspects are also different aspects of diversity. This morning at our table, we were talking about what is the definition of diversity. It definitely transcends the typical EEOC default categories, and I think experiences. So diversity is really about different experiences and thought, and that comes from your background, your culture. All those things make us diverse, and everyone is diverse in some way or the other. So thanks very much. So let's dive in. And before we begin, hopefully we can make this a intimate conversation. So at any time, if anyone has any questions or comments, please raise your hand and we can just jump right in. So let me toss this general question out to all the panelists, which is, what are your perspectives as to the business case of diversity and inclusion for your respective organizations? Mariette?
Sure. I think the guest speaker really highlighted that it's a wise business decision, and how we came to it, at least at Shawmut, there are 3 things that came into it. Our board of directors, which at the time was predominantly made up of white men, talked about the needs of, and they were venture capitalists, former CEOs, attorneys, and they talked a lot about, they weren't able to get it done at their workplaces, and there was a desire to see if it could happen at a place like Shawmut. And we talked about it was the right thing to do, but there was a clear business case to be made, at least in the construction industry, post-recession. So many people left the industry because it was devastated by the lack of growth that went on in 08, 09, and certainly into 10. As we started to build our workforce again, finding talented workers who could go out and build what's being built, as you see now in Boston and across the country, became incredibly hard. So we had to think differently about how we were going to attract talent and bring talent in. So we're also a very unique builder. Our competitors, we're not the kind of firm that builds a square building in an office park somewhere. We are highly engaged in academic and educational work. We tend to build in a luxury retail environment. So if you walk down Fifth Avenue or Rodeo Drive, you'd see our signs for sure. And we also have started a luxury home division that's done very well. And what we realized is across the table from us, our clients were women, people of color, transgendered people. We had to do something to not only mirror the workforce, or mirror our clients, but also people who had the same sensibilities and same experiences to build at a very high level and a very high client service focus. And then the third thing was, because so many people had left the industry, we needed to find a better mousetrap. We had to create a better mousetrap to how to get good talent. And we started to do some research into, women and people of color in particular had greater access to STEAM and STEM education over the last 10 or 15 years. And so starting really early, like at high schools, starting really early, like graduates from Wentworth University here or Roger Williams have fantastic construction management programs. We were able to tap in and say, we want your most diverse students. We created a partnership with Wentworth on scholarships for students that would be eligible for aid and also met certain criteria. And I'm proud to say now that program, what we call the construction management skills training, is 50% women, 50% men, and we have approximately 20 to 25% people of color that are in that. That's our breeding ground for future talent, and I'll certainly talk more about that in a minute.
Great, thanks, Marion. And what about you, Ingrid? What is the business case for diversity and inclusion where you are?
Well, the business case really is that whether you're in the public sector or the private sector, different perspectives from different places, geographically, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, they make us better professionals, whether we're social workers, attorneys, or business people. I work at Health and Human Services, and Health and Human Services, we're in the service industry. Lawyers are in the service industry. We have clients. We have people we are providing benefits to. And to the extent that we reflect the population we serve, I think it's important from the perspective of the people we serve. From the perspective of the people we serve, if there is no diversity, then there is less of a connection, perhaps, mentally, even before any communication occurs. Governor Deval Patrick, in February of 2011, signed Executive Order 526, and this doesn't apply to private industries, but with respect to public agencies, what that executive order did was it mandated that every agency in the Commonwealth had to have a diversity plan and an affirmative action plan, and each agency within the secretariats had to have diversity councils. I'm chair of the EHS Diversity Council, and we have people represented from across the Commonwealth. MEC workers, that's the Mass Health Enrollment Centers. We have social workers. We have people who work with Department of Transitional Assistance. We have attorneys. We have people in finance. We have IT folks, all in Health and Human Services. There are so many layers that that build an organization, but all those layers are ultimately there to serve the public from our perspective. And so the business case for diversity is that representing the population we serve makes us a better agency and helps us to also provide more inclusive services to those who are in need. Who here has read the book or heard of the book by Malcolm Gladwell called Talking to Strangers? Anybody? I urge you to read this book because what he has done in that 2019 publication is explain writ large the adverse consequences of not having diversity and not thinking about or being mindful about unconscious bias. Writ large, talking to strangers and misappropriating information that they give to you or placing your assumptions on them and assuming that they are like you or that they are like a stereotype you've created in your mind about them, which is not as an individual but as part of a group, not a person, can have adverse consequences which include traffic stops that result in death. Now that's extreme and I don't like to focus on the negative, but to the extent that we can not do that, I think that makes a business case for diversity because we'll have less lawsuits and we'll have less incidents at that extreme.
Thanks, Ingrid. And do you see a shifting demographic in your constituents in the state in terms of, from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, in terms of diversity?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, this is Massachusetts. This is the experiment that became national law. We were allowed to do mass health and to have everybody be able to qualify for some sort of medical benefits because we believe that it's a right in this state anyway. And under President Obama, that was implemented in, across the nation. And because of that perspective, and because since then we've been getting waivers and we've been working with the federal government to do further experiments so that our ways of managing care and health care and costs and charging services, global payments, et cetera, all of those things are experiments that we've been able to do matching grants with federal and state money so that we better serve our population here in Massachusetts and we can serve more people in Massachusetts and that more people can have varying degrees of health care and not no health care. And because of that, and because there's so much information about applying and how everybody can qualify for health benefits, we have a more diverse population because populations in Massachusetts who wouldn't even think of trying to get health care, including immigrants, and because of some SJC decisions, people who aren't necessarily here legally, but still if they're temporarily here in Massachusetts can qualify for health care. Because we have such an inclusive state with respect to health care, we've got demographics that need representation. We have demographics that are now included in what we call the Mass Health population.
Great, thanks. Thank you very much. And I imagine a lot of those consequences are literally life and death, right, for your
Yes.
constituents? Yeah, yeah. So, thank you. And then Raquel, for National Grid, what is the business case for diversity and inclusion?
So I know when many people see National Grid, they either like hate me immediately because their light bill's too high or their gas bill's too high. But what I would say is that what we do goes well beyond keeping the lights on and keeping your homes warm. We have a lot of programs. We serve 5 service territories, New York State, upstate New York, downstate New York, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. And I got some information from our HR department before this conference this morning, and over half of the customers we serve are diverse. So to me, that, aside from knowing that that is why it is critical for National Grid to ensure that its employees reflect our customers and our constituents, I know personally that that makes sense because we have hundreds of programs that serve a wide variety of customers, varying demographics, and we have a large low-income customer base. We have a large elderly customer base. We have a large population of customers who don't have English. English is not their first language. It's critical that our employees who are on the field, who interface with these customers, the attorneys in legal who have to work on some of the collections matters, if you will, or work on some of the programs, the executives who work on the programs, project development, huge distributed generation projects that we have to implement in order to meet the governor's goals for, clean energy by 2050. There's no way that you will have a diverse perspective on these very innovative and very important critical energy policies and initiatives if you do not have a diverse range of people working on those matters. So it makes good sense, and as around this topic, everyone always says the more diversity you have, the more diverse viewpoints you'll have. But I think it's even more critical at a place like National Grid, where we're making these critical decisions that impact customers, impact their pockets, livelihoods. It's important to have that perspective, not only from the field level where folks are going and shutting meters off or trying to assist customers with gas leaks, but all the way up to the folks who are working on sophisticated projects that most people don't know about, because again, when they think of National Grid, they only think of light bill, gas bill. So that's National Grid's business case, and I'm happy to say that they're taking it very seriously, and they've recognized a lot of gaps in the company, and they're working really hard and aggressively to address those gaps, because we cannot have half of our population be diverse. And on the other hand, the organization, the company that's serving their needs is not diverse. It will not work, and they've heard it from us internally, they've heard it externally, and they're doing something about it.
Thanks, Raquel. And you mentioned innovation, which, once again, to drive home the point that diversity is crucial for innovation, whether it's products, whether it's service. And I think the premise here, as we heard from all the different comments from our panelists, is that diversity inclusion is not only the right thing to do, of course it is, but it's also from the business perspective. And I think for most businesses, primarily business, but even for nonprofits, that's a driving force. So whether you actually truly believe it or not, I think everyone does believe in the bottom line. From the law firm perspective, as I said earlier, it's a business imperative, and that's illustrated by the multitude of requests for proposals that we get from our clients, including National Grid.
I helped write ours.
That's right. So from the law firm perspective, we're all getting these requests for proposals from existing or hopefully prospective clients that ask for specific information as to what law firms are doing from a diversity context, and also down to the weeds as to who your diverse attorneys are, what the diversity of the team is. So you can't just pitch with a diverse team. Once you get the matter, you have to staff it, and virtually all of our clients are asking for that information throughout the entire engagement. So it truly is a business imperative, so that, if you're a law firm and you don't get it, I think that's going to be a severe business disadvantage. So once again, I think, one takeaway hopefully is that diversity is not only the right thing to do, but it's also, it should be, and it is a business imperative, no matter what type of organization you are. So, moving on, Marianne, how do you, so we've just established why D&I is important, and you said it's very important, Chalmette. How do you get, and what have you seen are the best practices for getting engagement from senior management as far as supporting diversity and inclusion, at your organization?
Yeah. I think a couple things. One, I think we've all, well, at least I know I have worked at organizations where someone says we should do diversity, and they put something on their website and nothing actually comes of it. So we knew if we were going to tackle this, we had to make a business case. I've gone through that from a talent acquisition needs standpoint, staffing, but also clearly understanding who our clients were and understanding we had to be able to respond to their service needs, and we needed people who could do that. I'll tell a story about 5 years ago. We were here in Boston at our quarterly board meeting, and the board wanted 2 full days to talk about talent. And we started with this topic, and it took the 2 full days. It was it was a meeting that you walk away from thinking that was one of the most impactful meetings. And I give my board a lot of credit for being so open-minded and forward-thinking, and just being honest about what was scary about this work for them. And they took the initiative as the board to say, okay, we can't just have this meeting. We need to now hold our leaders accountable, and we need to make sure annually this is something that we're constantly checking in on, and we need to change as a board, obviously, our look and feel. They have added a woman to the board. We're currently interviewing a second candidate that I believe will be a person, a diverse candidate as well. And so that mix of now 4 will go to 5 with 2 candidates that end up being diverse, or 2 people on the board. Then it was sort of like, okay, how, right? It was clearly a mandate, but in a really positive way from our board. Our CEO has grown up at Chalmette, but he lives in New York City. I often joke, he's still a kid from New Hampshire in a lot of ways, but he's seen the world through a different lens because of Chalmette, and really feels like, I think his worldview has changed dramatically. And so he was able to be in a position to lead the discussion at the table, but we also knew putting HR at the helm of the diversity initiative would be dead in the water out of the gate. And so what we did was we created a diversity leadership council, and Chalmette's 100% ESOP, which means we're 100% employee owned. So every voice in the firm has a voice. Everyone owns a portion of the company, from the front desk clerk to the CEO. And so we put an initiative out there, said this is important to us for the following business reasons. Who would like to be involved? And one of the pieces of advice we got from a consulting group that we worked with was, it's not enough to not put HR at the helm. You really have to choose someone in your majority to be able to change the view. And so I often joke, and please don't take offense, we found the tallest white guy we could find who had passion around this, who's an amazing, amazing leader, and he did have a lot of passion, and he took on that Diversity Leadership Council and then set in motion a path not only for executive leadership to be held accountable, but the board to also be held accountable. And it included a few things. One was going around the country and explaining the business case to all employees, including our superintendents who are at job sites on a morning like this morning, saying what difference does it make to make sure you're conscious of the diversity of your teams, but also how do you relate and engage with people from different backgrounds than you. We hired a firm called Mind Gym to go out and do unconscious bias training for us. We partnered with them to make sure it had that ESOP feel to it, sort of that ownership feel to it. And we did that across the entire country, all levels, all constituencies. Every employee went through it. And leaders went through a different version of that as well, managers and up. And then, we most recently have, when I talk about our pyramid, so we are 50% women, 50% male at our lowest level, our entry-level roles. You go up to the individual contributor role, that's around 35%, still a good number. At the manager level, it drops off to like 18 to 20%, and then at the senior executive level, it stays, thankfully, at about 15 to 20%, and then at the executive level, it's 14%. So our job was to get more of that early in career talent up through the organization quickly but, with some scaffolding, to use a construction term, along the way. And the way we've now done that is through a sponsorship program, an executive sponsorship program. So everyone on the executive leadership team and our board is responsible for at least 2, some more, diverse employees that we have. And that's more than just mentorship. That's advocating for what he or she is doing that's really pushing the needle. It can sometimes be the person who has to have a tough conversation with that employee in addition to their manager, if it's a performance issue or whatnot. So our goal is to get more women and people of color in particular into that senior level management role and executive level management. Our board meets every January for a talent-only conversation. And I will tell you, we're 4 or 5 years into this journey right now. They're serious about it. I mean, I'm getting emails on a regular basis. What are these numbers going to look like? And how can we meet more diverse candidates when we come out to your Los Angeles office? So it's, from an HR standpoint, it's great work for us. Sometimes it's a lot of work. But you can actually start to see the needle being pushed in the right direction around this. So, as I said, we're very proud of having a board that was this forward-thinking, and also an executive team that quickly got on board because of the business case.
Wow, great comments and several things. So one of the things that I really want to emphasize what you said, Marianne, was that, ideally, diversity inclusion is more than just an HR issue. And I think the best practice is that, corporations, and where I was previously at Mercedes-Benz, I reported directly to the CEO, because I think that, no offense to the HR professionals in the room, that, certainly I think diversity inclusion is relevant to HR, but it's much broader than that. I think that if you limit it solely to HR, or it's seen as an HR issue, I think it really diminishes the potential. And I think also it's crucial from a leadership position that you have champions. And that, presumably, hopefully, your CEO or the leader of the organization is a champion. And I think this leads to, my comment on this is that, at our firm, we are definitely conscious of, to the extent that this perception exists, which I think it does at a lot of places too, which is that, D&I is a great thing. People support it. It's a good thing to have, but it's really the responsibility or opportunities for those who are diverse, or, for the diverse partners or the diverse associates or the D&I committee or my area, right? So, but the truth is, it's exactly the opposite, that diversity and inclusion should be the responsibility and an opportunity for everyone. And I think that, that's one of the challenges, and, we spoke about this at our table, is that it's really about the culture. I think, we can talk about, how do you change the culture? How do you change the culture of your organization to, number one, know what D&I is, that it's more than just, those narrow EEOC categories. But also, how do you change the culture so that it's one that values diversity? But the key thing that, I think most people tend to ignore is the other term, which is inclusion. Because you can have all the diversity in the world in an organization or team, but if you don't have an inclusive environment, then you have nothing. So I think that, most people don't really focus on that.
Yeah, we talk a lot, again, as an ESOP, everyone's an owner, about belonging and feeling like you can bring your best self to work every day, and try to create, not having employees come to work encumbered by what's bothering them at home, from a work-life standpoint, and even from a employee diversity standpoint, that's, we all acknowledge that, and we all sort of say we continue to work on that. So the sense of belonging, that's another word that you hear in the D&I space a lot, is really becoming powerful. And I think that means, like the speaker said, listening to both sides of the argument sometimes, even when that's not always comfortable.
Right. And then, Raquel, do you have any thoughts on how do you get, leadership to buy in to D&I efforts?
Yeah, what National Grid has done to get leadership to buy in, they realized that metrics were not working. So they had managers say, we're trying, we have X number of women, X number of ethnically diverse employees, so we're doing our jobs. But that was the diversity piece. They check the box, they go, they get their huge, merit increases, bonuses that are linked to the company's performance. But then those numbers fall off, and that conversation doesn't take place again until the following year. And you can just say, look, they moved, we had problems with retention. So what National Grid did to address that, listening to a lot of the voices of the employees, such as myself, I'm in legal, but they do actually pay attention to a lot of the surveys. What they did was they hit the bottom line, because we all know money talks, right? When you start tying these objectives to compensation, all of a sudden it becomes important. And you know, some may argue that should not be what drives you to do the right thing, but it's a starting point, and at least it gets people to pay close attention. So what National Grid has done is they have what they're calling the Inclusion and Diversity Campaign, a year-long effort, and the purpose of that is to change. You mentioned championing it, being a champion for diversity and inclusion, changing the culture. They're trying to have a huge cultural shift. So a few of the goals of that is to promote inclusion and diversity as a source of strength, encourage everyone to bring their entire authentic selves to work, foster inclusive leadership, increase self-identification. So at the end of this campaign, unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to, they want to just check other because they think it may affect them in a certain way, but they want, at the end of this campaign, for folks to be proud of who they are, self-identify, so that we can have, like, you know, wholesome numbers in the end. But going back to what they're doing is they're holding leaders accountable. So now the leaders have all the leaders in the company, including the ones in legal, they had to attend mandatory workshops and trainings. Topics included unconscious bias, and then they had to walk away and report to their leaders, because there are a bunch of layers of leadership at National Grid. Like, you can't throw the trash out without checking a box. So there are a bunch of people who can hold you accountable. They actually had to come up with objectives around diversity and inclusion. And those objectives, they have monthly, I believe, meetings where they report on those objectives. So it is no longer enough to say, my team is diverse. You have to now say, who have I promoted? Who did I send to the company's accelerated leadership development program? Who did I send to this conference, which oftentimes leads to amazing career opportunities, either within the company or outside of the company? We don't like to lose people, but to the extent that we're advancing professionals, it's a good thing. So the leaders have to now report on these objectives, and it's making a lot of them really own it, and they're proud of it. It's, even though it's tied to their compensation, that's one of the outcomes, they're really proud of it, and the company is seeing a shift in the culture, because now folks are not just focusing on getting the people in, but they're focusing on inclusion. And, you know, I'll end by saying, I can't remember who coined this, but it resonated with me the first time I heard it, inclusion. So diversity is inviting everyone to the party. I'm sure all of you in the room have heard this. And inclusion is actually inviting folks to dance. So you go to a party and you see, like, all the people, they love the music and they're just dancing, and then you see folks just standing around. And I think what they recognized at my organization was that there were just too many of us standing around. So we were in the room, but we weren't being seen, we weren't being heard, and the folks who held the tools to make the decisions, they weren't really getting it, because it was enough for us to be there in the party. It looked good, and that's no longer going to cut it. My 10-year-old goes to a private school in Concord, and he said to me 2 days ago, he said, you know, I don't mind volunteering, but why do they always come and snatch me out of my class, especially gym, when there's a black kid on tour? And I said, because right now you're the only black kid in 5th grade, that's why. And to me, that was powerful, because what that meant to me is that at a very young age, he recognizes that he's being used in a certain way, and he's happy to contribute, but it feels uncomfortable for him. And for a while, I was that person at various organizations. I was that person at my company. You see the same face on the the pamphlet on the website, and then you meet them in person. It's like, you look like 50 years older, because that picture is the same picture they put up every year. So what my 10-year-old said, the way it translates to this discussion, is that we should not have to do that. We should not have to grab the same person every time to say, look, we're working hard at diversity, because once you master the inclusion piece, you'll have way too many people to choose from, and that is what National Grid is trying to address, and that's why 8 years later, I'm still there in legal, because I'm proud to be a part of an organization that recognizes, you know, we have a problem, and now we're going to address it, and it is the inclusion piece.
And great comments, and I think, you know, that paradigm of being, you know, the one and only, I think, unfortunately still exists. And I think that until we get a critical mass, whether it's at a law firm, whether it's, at a corporation where no longer, the diverse folks are the visible tokens, I think that's, one thing to change. But you know what, as I said, we have some challenges. I think as long as we're moving the needle forward, I think that's all we can do. So Ingrid, several folks have mentioned the term unconscious bias. That's one of your, areas of expertise. What are some ways, best practices to combat, unconscious bias?
I have some tips and some questions that I think we should think about. But before I talk about that, let's talk about what's unconscious bias. And I'm going to share the story as to why I've been doing unconscious bias training since 2003, initially for attorneys and specifically for family law attorneys. Early on in my practice, when I was in the private sector, I was getting a bunch of guardian ad litem appointments. Guardian ad litems, for those who don't practice family law, are those appointed by the probate and family court to go do reports, interview children, and do reports about what's in the best interest of the child, et cetera, and do home visits. So I was being appointed for cases where the first guardian ad litem had to resign because the report couldn't be done because a home visit couldn't happen because there was a disconnect. And I was appointed for some Asian families which were not my Asian, I'll just say. I'm half Japanese and I'm half Austrian, and I don't speak Mandarin, I don't speak Cantonese, I don't speak Cambodian. But, I was appointed initially for a family, which was an extended family living situation, a Chinese family, and I was also having a problem with the home visit, and I was the second guardian ad litem so I was determined to finish this. And what I ended up finding out after I kind of I just, basically fell down on my knees with one of the parties and said, look, I can't do this, I can't finish this, you have to help me. You have to help me. How can I do a home visit? I can't not do a home visit. Every time I make an arrangement, I show up and nobody will let me in. She said, you have to talk to my father-in-law. Now, this is a person who had nothing to do with the child care in this household. However, he was the person from the old country who said who came and went in this household. And really, at the bottom line for unconscious bias, it's putting away all your assumptions, all the things that you don't even know you're thinking, all those filters, and kind of at the baseline, reaching out to another human being with respect and saying, look, I'm trying to understand you and your family, and I would like to ask you to help me. And so what I ended up having to do was set up an interview with this, with her father-in-law, this grandfather, and not that it's optimal, but we had a cousin that both parties agreed on, they soon-to-be ex-spouses, to translate, and I passed muster, and then I had to make a separate appointment to come and do a home visit. But what that really illustrated to me is that at the baseline for unconscious bias, thinking about unconscious bias is about thinking about respect. It's about thinking about humility and thinking about us all being on the human team, not the different demographic team, not divided up because of some group that we belong to. And I'll just tell you one other story which kind of also sort of caused me to start thinking about unconscious bias and why it's important to us as professionals when we're in the service industry. Early on in my career, too, I had a client where I was getting an emergency guardianship, and I hadn't met this client. He flew in from out of state for a hearing. We had talked on the phone. This was before the internet was so big, and we could actually look up pictures of people and see what they looked like. And I told him to meet me in front of the courthouse. I neglected to explain what I looked like. And so, Ingrid Schrofner, do I look like an Ingrid Schrofner to you? Apparently not, for him anyway, from his perspective of what a person with that name would look like. So 20 minutes after we were supposed to meet, I saw this person, this man looking like a little bewildered in front of the courthouse, and I walked up and said, hi, I'm Ingrid Schrofner. And he looked really uncomfortable, and he said to me, oh, you look different than I thought. In that moment, I thought, I could be offended, I could be many things, but guess what? I'm his lawyer. I'm in the service industry and I have to serve him. It's not about me. I have to get him to be comfortable because he's going to have to testify. He's never done it before, and I know he's nervous. So, and we have to get this emergency guardianship for his mother to be placed. So I decided to say something different than I was thinking necessarily, and I said, oh, you know, I'm sorry. Did you think I was going to be like 6 feet tall and have big gold braids? And he smiled, and it made him feel better. It broke the ice, and we were able to go, you know, get the emergency guardianship. But what those two stories illustrate to me is that unconscious bias is about snap judgments. And you know, we live in this world of technology where we are making snap judgments all the time. As things get faster and faster and we have to respond to emails, we want to be more and more efficient. The thing is, when we make snap judgments, we're not thinking, we're reacting. So really, at baseline, what unconscious bias is stopping the snap judgment, stopping the jumping to conclusions based on where we are from when we're dealing with people in the outside world. You know, we have an older point of view from, say, caveman days when we were feeling tribal and we needed to, you know, be in groups that are like ourselves, versus the more modern age when we want to really treat people as individuals, not as groups, because there was safety in groups when we were in this older age. And you know, when you smell food that's spoiled and you eat it, of course that would make you sick. But when you're talking about people, it's a little different. So that's a snap judgment. Now, getting to the actual point of the question, I didn't totally lose track of that. Really, what I think we need to do with respect to making decisions in organizations and unconscious bias is acknowledge bias. The fact is, as human beings, we all do this. We all have unconscious bias. We all make snap judgments. And so I think the point really is to acknowledge that we all do this, and it's not bad. The fact that you make a snap judgment or that you have unconscious bias doesn't make you a person who grew up in, say, a racist family. It doesn't make you somebody who is wrong or not informed or not sophisticated. The fact is we all do it, and as soon as we acknowledge that, it takes away any gradations of morality or, you know, anything on that spectrum. So after we acknowledge bias, you know, some questions we should ask ourselves is to take note of your first impression. Is it bias or a stereotype? You know, there is this idea in some of the literature that our first impressions are what we go with because it's easier. The first thing we see is something that we want to go back to because it was the first thing, as opposed to the second thing, because we don't want to necessarily change our mind because it's less efficient. So think about your first impression. Stop and think before making decisions. Set clear criteria related to performance. Embrace differences because, as folks here on this panel have pointed out, diversity and different perspectives make us better, and it causes innovation. Take on the perspective of others. Think about and encourage those who do not agree with you or who you don't think you will agree with. Think about having discussions so that you can better inform your perspective and maybe think about other people's perspective and maybe align or think differently. And have a sense of accountability. Can you justify your decision? Deliberative processing, or these days it's called mindfulness, is another thing we should think about. Mindfulness is not just pausing, but evaluating internally before doing something externally. So some of the tips that I came up with in preparing for this are these questions to limit the effects of this hidden bias in the workplace. Asking the following questions. One is, do I typically hire the same person, same abilities, gender, race, ethnic background, etc.? What do I mean when I say that the candidate is not the right fit? What is that, the right fit? Is it like me? Is it like somebody I admire? Is it like somebody who has been promoted recently? What is that? To whom do I like to assign work and leadership roles? Is it a certain demographic every time? Is it different? Do I have the same go-to people most of the time? Should I change that? Whom do I encourage to lead or speak out at meetings? The same people? Maybe I should change that. Am I creating opportunities for those less extroverted to demonstrate their capabilities? Here in the United States, as opposed to in some other countries where speaking or promoting yourself or being externally engaged might not be as encouraged, those who tend to be extroverted sometimes have the upper hand because they look people in the eye, whereas in some cultures it's not considered polite, look people in the eye and they promote themselves. Well, what about those who come from maybe a different background who might not be doing that? Who are those people in the room? How do I identify candidates for promotion or succession? What criteria do I use? Again, it's being thoughtful, mindful about criteria, being accountable to yourself and to your organization. And finally, do I judge applicants' qualifications when reviewing their resumes based in part on their name? Something else? There were some studies and experiments with respect to musicians trying out for orchestras. I think maybe some of you are nodding out there in the audience, where people were playing to try out for orchestras because there seemed to be some sort of unconscious bias based on gender. And when those who were listening to the tryouts didn't see the actual person playing, apparently it improved things. So these are just some things to think about, some questions to ask yourself. And also, at the bottom line, respect and humility and continuing to evaluate yourself and your organization.
Great perspective, and this is a topic that we can spend a full day on, as you all know. But I just want to add that, so these are mostly unconscious, right? So people aren't conscious of these biases, but one way to sort of shed the light on that is to, to hold people accountable or, just measure. And I think, at the law firm perspective, things like looking at whether there are disparities between the billable hours that diverse associates get versus non-diverse associates in terms of work assignments. So there are ways of quantifying the effects of unconscious bias, and particularly when you talk about recruiting, which is a great segue to our last question for Raquel, which is, how do you recruit, retain, and diverse talent? Can you provide some best practices at National Grid?
Sure. So for recruiting, what we found, I'm on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and what we found is reaching out to the affinity groups. There are a lot of them. So we attend their conferences, we attend their events, we encourage students to take our business cards, but actually follow up when they take those business cards. We also attend a lot of the CLEs that our outside clients have, because a lot of times the partners at those firms are very open about saying, we do have these summer associates or interns, and because we've minimize the numbers in the program, we can't really hire everyone, but these may be opportunities for you to meet potential, talent. So we've started to use that as an opportunity. Talent pipeline programs, National Grid has a lot of, they call them the grid turns. So they have interns not only in from high school, but also in college, because they're trying to give them that exposure to STEM very early on. So that's one way. And a few of us who like to travel, we've put a few bugs in theirs, and I think we may be successful. But when I was at the law firm, we would travel to law school fairs, career fairs, and I find that that's something that in-house counsel, we really have not tapped into that, because everyone always thinks of traditional large firm when they think of those career opportunities. So now we're still working on fine-tuning what the process would look like, but we're trying to partner with career development offices to find out where those opportunities are, so that we can say, at National Grid, you can come in entry level right out of law school. You don't have to have experience in energy. Like, I didn't even know what a kilowatt hour was before I worked there, and I left my firm practice for 7 years, government practice for 2 years, and just went in-house in energy. I had no idea what I was getting into. So we try to tell those types of stories to the up-and-coming talent, so that they know that these opportunities exist, because they just don't. They don't know. So not only do we have those talent pipeline programs, but we also a lot of word of mouth. I think it's lost on a lot of the up and coming talent how it's critical to network. So I actually found a few interns just because someone sent me a message either through social media or LinkedIn saying, hey, is National Grid hiring any interns? And we've been doing a lot of that because, again, I used the word aggressive earlier, but they're trying to be very aggressive about diversity and inclusion, recruiting talent, retaining talent. So anything at this point is a good opportunity for that. And as long as it's reasonable, leadership has been very supportive. So there's no strict parameter or framework for getting in the door. And we found those measures. We found that those types of measures actually lead to retaining really good talent because the relationships are key at the beginning. In terms of retaining, what National Grid has done, I mentioned earlier that year-long campaign, and that campaign is not really focused on. It's focused on the organization as a whole, but they're really targeting in a positive way leadership, because once you get folks at the top of the organization to show that they care and that they are supportive of every measure we have, and once they're held accountable, it changes everything. So at our table, we were talking about, work-life balance, working from home. It's one thing to have a policy, but if you have a manager who frowns on it, it doesn't matter that the policy is there because your employees will not take advantage of those types of policies. So I think this campaign that the company is undergoing right now is huge. So everywhere you walk in the hallways in our corporate offices in Waltham, you see posters. They highlight a different employee, some of whom are leaders or executives every month. So you'll see big, large posters tell you where they're from, what they do in the organization, and then they have like a brown bag, and we call them town halls. So they're doing that because they want everyone to know, like, there's a lot of noise. Like, everyone, they want them to know leadership has bought into this, and we care. So it's being thrown in our faces, but it's a good thing. And that makes people want to stay. Leadership has gone out of its way to support and sponsor all the employee resource groups. So we have 10 of them in National Grid. And it's not just about race. We have groups for folks with disabilities, veterans. And the fact that leadership supports these organizations through, sponsoring conferences or showing up at their 8 a.m. brown bags to speak, it makes a difference because they're not just saying, oh, we have these groups, but these groups, they actually have voices in the organization. And when they speak, people listen. So I think that is another way that the company has retained good talent, because who doesn't want to be a part of an organization where your voice is really heard and it means something and it goes a long way. Mentoring is really big. They have, it's not exactly the same in terms of sponsoring and identifying opportunities, but they do have a mentoring program where executives, they call it executive conversations, and you start out by having, you rotate through different rooms, a day-long program, you meet with different executives, and in the end, you identify who you think is the best fit for you. And that relationship, it really does have to be organic over time, but that has led to greater numbers on the retention end, because if you have someone who is high up in the organization and they actually care about your development and they're willing to mentor and later sponsor you, it makes a difference. And that has been successful because now it's not just the employees on the lower level saying we want to create this mentoring program, but it's the executives who are saying this is a need in the organization and this is what we think needs to be done to meet that need. So there's like a formal mentoring program. And as most people know, when you have the CEOs and folks who are in the boardroom making decisions, people tend to listen. And employees participate because they don't think it's just another group meeting, but rather it's something that can make a difference. They have a lot of accelerated development programs with different levels. So they have, even in legal, you have senior counsel who can participate in leadership development programs. They call them accelerated because they compress what would be a year-long program into 6 months. And those opportunities have created huge opportunities for growth internally. So National Grid has identified several programs, and they have an application process, but it's another way to let talent know that not only do we care about keeping you, but we care about developing you, and here are the things we're going to do. And they put a lot of money into these programs, and you see the people who go through these programs move up the ranks pretty quickly. So, and they also have 50% of the participants in our accelerated development programs are ethnically diverse. So it's a good thing. The numbers are showing it. And again, all of these things are baked into objectives for the leaders. So again, that is one of the ways in which they're going to keep the leaders accountable. And it's just one big circle. And everyone feels good about it, because not only do the employees get to participate and feel valued and know that National Grid cares about them staying, but the leaders now can see the difference and see the fruits of their labor. And I would just say, finally, in recruiting and retaining, another way that they do that is just by developing employees. So even if there's a conference every year I go to, it's the Association of Blacks in Energy. It's a very expensive conference, but they never say no, because they know that it is valuable to send employees to conferences where we can work on our professional development, we can network, and really come back and add even more value to the organization. So the company has identified that as a critical way of, keeping employees happy. Send them to the conferences if they want to go. Pay for the memberships. One of the final notes I'll make is I don't miss billable hours at all. I will never bill anything in a 6-minute increment at all, ever. But at National Grid, one of the things that they really do is they actually encourage us now as a part of our objectives to tell them, how many hours did you spend doing something to take care of yourself? And that, when we first saw that, built into our objectives, we thought it was really strange. Why are you asking about self-care as a part of my objectives? But I think it's just yet another way for the company to demonstrate that, you're a part of your compensation is linked to whether you're taking self-care seriously. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't show up completely. So I think, we have, you can gain, stars, you can gain points towards your benefits, student loans, but now you actually have to report on what you did to take care of yourself. And I was blown away when I saw that, but it sent a huge message to us about, the fact that the company now, they're just not speaking words, but they're actually putting action behind it, and to tie, your overall review and assessment and compensation to whether this line item was complete and whether you can show proof that you did something to take care of yourself is to me critical. And I think it is another way to retain good talent, because you're focusing on the whole employee and not just the part of the employee who helps you make your bottom line.
Great, great, thanks. And it sounds like a lot of the best practices there. And, just by hiring diverse individuals isn't the end, right? Very crucial is how do you retain them? And I think in the legal arena, for law firms particularly, that is a challenge, not just of diverse associates in general, but attrition, retention is a major issue for law firms today. But how do you keep, retain, and develop diverse individuals as well? So we're almost at the end of our time. Thanks for all the fantastic comments. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. So are there any questions from the audience? Now's your chance. Yes.
Regarding retention, what do folks do if that is an issue?
Anybody? Arian?
I mean, I think Raquel said it well. I mean, I think your employees will stay for 2 reasons. If they feel valued and they feel like they belong at the table, and honestly, if they have a good manager. I was just reading an article on the way up on the train. That is, unfortunately, remains 60 to 65% of the reason people leave their organizations. It's not money, it's not benefits, it tends to be that person they interact with or not every day. And so we have doubled down on great leadership training that has the D, E, and I theme woven through everything that we do. For us, that's been a real differentiator. And I think the other thing regarding retention is if they see the business results, so as an ESOP, where, again, every employee owns the company, and that shows up in a percentage of shares that they get every year. Well, we can easily link our diversity and inclusion efforts over the last 5 years to our accelerated growth. And so they are not only living in the belonging space, but they see that show up in their annual contribution to their ESOP account every year. And so it's important that we show that retentive value of doing this not only creates, a great workplace, but it creates wealth for your family and the future of your family. And that's something they can, tap into upon retirement. But, our employees who sort of feel like, hey, I'm not paid as well as I want to be paid, we give them the total comp view and say, we understand Suffolk's got a good program, we understand Gilbane's got a good program, but they don't have this. So from a retentive standpoint, I think it's those few things, both money, great leadership, and a sense of belonging.
Yeah, and I think, just to quickly add, that I think another key thing for retention is listening. I think that, at our firm, we do associate surveys because, it's important to listen to what not just the diverse attorneys, want or identify as issues, it's everyone. So you have to listen. And then once you listen and once they tell you, you have to follow through. Because I think one of the worst things to do is to ask people what they want and then not give it to them. So you really have to listen, but also follow through. So, quick hands, yes?
I just wanted to follow up on Marianne, sort of what are you using to show the direct link? You're saying sort of, we're doing the D&I work, it's our accelerated piece. What mechanism are you using to do that?
I mean, I think it's really two things for us. One is client surveys, right, that say, hey, you've given us a more senior, a higher level of service than we've seen in the past. And we can link jobs that have had great profit margins and jobs that have had delighted clients to the team that was on those jobs, and they tend to be more diverse teams. That's one thing. And then I think the other piece is, you can see our year-over-year growth when we took a stab at this, right? And I'm not saying our competitor firms aren't also growing and doing well, but we really feel it's a differentiator for us. We feel like, anyone can build a building. Any firm that you choose can build a building. How we build it, the people that we bring to the table to work with you is different. And I think in some ways, industry leading at 35% female overall. We tout that a lot because it's a great number.
I just want to say climate surveys, I think, are very important because if you are part of an organization that's doing one, they are taking that first step to say, okay, we might not like the data, but we're willing to do this. And that is important to the employees of that organization. And then again, as folks have pointed out, doing something with the results. But the fact that you do one at all is important.
Question here?
Yeah, I may be making a few assumptions, but based on how you all described the places where you work, I think they're all relatively large, talking multiple offices, multiple locations, probably, a couple hundred employee type places, if not that. I work at a relatively small, mid-sized law firm, and I'm just wondering how some of these ideas translate when you're dealing with a much smaller sort of group of employees, when you're hiring maybe one attorney every 18 months, so we're, not the same sort of, bringing in 30 new people every September, and sort of just like a smaller pool of people, but still lots of diversity with, sort of in that pool and still the same concerns. So I guess, how do you sort of speak to the smaller place?
I think there are pros and cons to being smaller. I think, one of the challenges as, you don't have that many opportunities in terms of hiring, right? But I think that to counter that, the same principles apply that, what kind of culture does your firm have? So when you're going out to recruit, that's the culture you want to sort of distinguish yourselves from all the other, hires there. I would think that one of the advantages of being small is that you're much more nimble, but that, you have less layers of bureaucracy, to make policy. So I think there are pros and cons about being smaller, but I think the general principles apply, and you can sort of scale down. Any other thoughts?
I agree. I think the same principles would apply because I think, unfortunately, a lot of these mid-sized firms and smaller firms use the fact that they're small as an excuse because we've been trying to, at National Grid, shift and not just hire large firms. Like I worked at a large firm for 7 years, so I have a huge network, and I want to be able to go to my GC and say, my friend just made partner. Like, let's look at my friend. Let's look at this person. And you go to the website, and it's just that one friend who's a partner, happens to be of color, but then when you look at the associates, 25 people, and you don't see anyone else other than, people who are not, considered diverse. So bottom line is, I think there are probably more opportunities to tackle the issues when you do have a smaller pool of employees, because it's just easier. At a large organization, of course, you have many resources, but I think those are opportunities, especially when, these smaller or mid-sized firms are trying to get business from these large organizations. I think there are opportunities to hire interns, promote your diverse talent, push them up through partnership, and just many of these things can still be done, just on a smaller scale.
Great, yes.
You mentioned associate surveys, which I was interested in, and we've been exploring that idea at our firm. One of the questions is, of course, should they be anonymous? And we determined that they should be, because otherwise you chill candid responses. But then taking the next step in terms of execution, if you get some candid responses back that are surprising, how do you suggest going about that when they're anonymous responses? You're not quite sure what pocket of the firm is responding to you, and how do you address it?
Right, that's also a balancing act between, is it truly anonymous? I think a lot of people are skeptical about that, but I think there are, there are platforms and third-party administrators that can, almost guarantee that anonymity. So we actually have a retention development committee that actually meets, and they sort of drafted the survey. What's impressive is, I think got about maybe 70% participation. We like to get 95%, so that's the thing we're working towards. But I think what was impressive was the large number of verbatim comments, where people actually took the time to actually provide their thoughts. And this is a great thing. I think one of the comments that the committee really enjoyed that stuck out was, and we don't know if this was totally serious, but one of the comments was, for work-life balance, they wanted to bring their dog to work. So, and I think that was, maybe tongue-in-cheek, but I think that the large number of verbatim comments that we got, I think, was a sign that people really cared about giving their opinion. So I think that, you can structure, and I think it's almost, if you, get some input from the very same population that you want to poll, because they can give the ideas of what questions to ask. Because once again, maybe from the unconscious bias perspective, you don't know what to ask. So maybe if you get the folks from that population, you can get some relevant questions to ask. But we found it, very, very insightful, and we actually, launched several things as a result of that survey.
I just have one quick thing to add. We actually do the same thing. Our general counsel does the same thing in the legal department at National Grid. And they have a box, and we have these monthly town hall meetings, and she'll read some of the anonymous comments. And she was trying to grapple with that same idea. How do I address this if I don't know who's making these very concerning comments? So what she did was, at the last town meeting we have them once a month, she said, look, I really care, and there are certain things I can implement. You wanted to feel more connected, so now we're gonna pay for socials, hopefully folks show up. But what she did was made herself available, and we have 5 service territories, so 5 different offices, and she actually went around, and there was a sign-up sheet, and you could go and speak with her. Now, some people, I'm sure, were hesitant to take her up on that opportunity, but a lot of the most recent changes came out of those meetings, because folks were more forthcoming in person, because they knew that she actually took their feedback seriously. And we can see in legal the changes that she's implemented based on some of that feedback. So now it has built this level of trust, and that was her creative way to get around the anonymous issue, because some of the comments she was receiving was, I hate it here, morale is really low, like leadership sucks. And it's like, oh my God, what do I do with that? So the face-to-face meetings have really been useful, and that's what she said. But I mean, I think it works both ways. those of us providing the feedback, we also have to be very honest and be willing to have those conversations. But that's just one way that I think you could handle the anonymous piece of it. It's harder at a large firm, but I still think there are ways to tackle that since large firms usually have different offices anyway.
Great. Well, thanks very much to the panel, and thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.